I would like to start by introducing our panelists. With me today is Hylda Wiarda from our Dutch partner firm Bronske Steur. She is located in the Amsterdam office. She specialized, as we all are, in employment, and also in addition, she's specialized in discrimination law. Next, we have Rikke Falk Dambo, who's a partner at the Danish partner firm Norbom Winding in Copenhagen. You are specialized, Rikke, in equal treatment, discrimination law, in addition, of course, to being an employment law specialist. Next, we have Birgit. You are a partner, Birgit Bogt-Majarek. You're a founding partner of our Austrian firm in the Vienna office of Schima, Meyer, and Sterlinger. And you are the head of employment, and I know that you have published repeatedly on our topic of today. Then we have Paul Mclean. You are a partner in the Vancouver office of our Canadian partner firm, Matthews Dinsdale, and I just realized it must be very early in the morning for you, Paul. Thank you for getting up so early to join us. I saw on your website, you are also a specialist in ice hockey, and then, of course, in employment law, human rights, and litigation. Myself, for those of you who may be disappointed not to see Alexander here, he's tied up in an all-day meeting today. So instead of Alexander Ulrich, you will see me. I have been in touch with the directive we are speaking about earlier last year and the year before, because I was part of a legal initiative who was fighting for a right for family leave for board members under German law who are not considered employees under German law. So I've been dealing with this directive before. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to our discussion today. Let me start by briefly describing the EU directive. It is becoming a fairly close deadline on August 2 this year. It is to be implemented in all EU countries, the directive 2019-1158. The directive gives minimum requirements for parental leave and carers leave for employees. And if you look at the recitals of the directive, you can see that the EU has the purpose of trying to support the equality of female and male employees in their balance of work, paid for their work for the employer, and working at home unpaid for family, for children, and for elderly parents or other family members. I might add that I think all of the panelists are also parents, such as I am, so we all have our share of work balance to juggle with. So you could say we are double specialists today. So let me start with the status of the implementation of the EU directive in Germany. There has been a draft published by the Federal Ministry of Labor at the end of April this year. So far, no statute has been passed, and let alone been implemented. And the German draft just closes the gaps between a fairly wide level of protection, which is already available for employees who are expecting a child or who want to take care of an ailing family member. But what is remarkable is that the draft legislation, which has now been, has been published in April, does not include father's leave, which is paid at the same level that the regular salary would be. So that means that a father can, of course, take parental leave, but they would only be paid so-called Elterngeld, which is between 300 and 1,800 euros per month. And depending on the income level of the father, this is quite a significant pay gap, possibly in a time when the young family also has a lower income if the mother is planning to take parental leave. So it is interesting and can be speculated why that has not been included. I know that German employers, or our clients, I must say, of course, have been struggling with many obligations during COVID, and also the economy is currently possibly in a not so perfect situation given the Ukraine war, but still it's interesting. So that being said, I would now be interested in the status of the implementation in Austria, and would like to hand over to you, Birgit, for for your view and your report on the implementation in Austria.
Okay, great. Thank you for this nice introduction, Jessica, and welcome also from my side. And what Jessica said concerning the status quo of the implementation in Germany also is true for Austria, stating that many of the regulations that were included or are included in the directive are already in place in Austria since sometimes many years, or concerning the specific free time or paid leave for fathers is in place since at least 3 years. So we have a lot of these regulations already, and we have a very strong protection, especially, which is basically starting from the very beginning, like the pregnancy of the mothers until at the end you have a specific protection until the fourth birthday of the child. So you can only be dismissed with the specific agreement of the court. So there is a much stricter protection than the one required by the directive, which basically is only based on unfair motives. But an issue that we have in Austria, as well as Jessica mentioned for Germany, is the payment situation. And I tried to figure out what will be the consequences of the directive for Austrian legislation, because as I said, we basically have all the regulations that are required in the directive already in place, more or less. But especially concerning payments, there might be some additional regulations, because the system in Austria is quite complex in this regard, and it is not paid by the employer, but it's paid by the state. And depending on the models, there will be very different situations for fathers, mothers, and you can combine the system. So that's so far the situation in Austria. And now I hand back to Jessica.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Birgit, this seems like it's fairly similar in Austria and in Germany. And I'm interested to hear what the other countries are saying about paid father's leave. And so Hylda, you in the preparation, you indicated that most, as we now, Birgit and I have said, most parts have already been implemented in the past. So it's the only change is that it is now going to be partially paid. So if you just want to add a bit to that.
Yes, Jessica, that is indeed correct for the Netherlands. We, over the past years, bits and pieces have been added to all the leave and leave options and the various leave facilities that we knew. So I think back in 2019 already, there was a 1 week paid partner leave or father leave, so to speak. Okay. And then it was added on with an additional 5 weeks being partially paid for partners. And now with the implementation of this directive, it's led up to an additional 9 weeks of paid parental leave out of the 26 in total. So step by step, this has indeed increased in the Netherlands, but it wasn't really in that sense a shocking introduction or implementation for us.
Okay, thank you. Then I will move on to you, Rikke, and ask you to explain the situation in Denmark briefly.
Of course. Thank you, Jessica. Well, we had a bill passed back in March, and we will be on time. So we are ready until 1st or 2nd of August when we need to have this directive implemented into Danish legislation. The new thing in this process is that we will, of course, earmark weeks for the father and the mother, and it will be 11 weeks for both parents. And if it's not taken, it will lapse. And these weeks will be with public benefits. So the changes to the Act will introduce a 24 week entitlement with public benefits to each of the parties in the family. And then we have many CBAs, policies within the companies where employees are granted salary during these leave periods, but I will get back to that later on. But what I also want to mention is that with this new act, we also introduce an acknowledgement of rainbow families. As of 1st January 2024, it would be possible to share the leave within a rainbow family. So acknowledging the fact that a family can be more than 2 members, it can be up to 4, so that you can share the leave between these family members. And also I want to mention that single parents will also be provided with actually 46 weeks of leave, and it will be both for solo mothers and solo fathers. They will have this entitlement to 46 weeks leave. And they will actually also be entitled to share some of this leave with their close family members. So that will be very interesting to see how that will develop. I mean, HR departments might, receive requests for leave from, someone they didn't really expect to hear from. So it will be very interesting to follow.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much. Yeah, the German statute also not only entitles the actual fathers, but also a partner. So it could also be a 2-female family. And also already existing statute gives parental leave to grandparents under certain circumstances. So that's also where German law is acknowledging a certain fact, actually, which is not new, but anyway, it's good to be acknowledged. So now I'll move to Canada and be really interested, Paul, in to know Canada is outside of the EU, obviously. So I'm really interested to hear from you what the situation is in Canada, and possibly you can glimpse across the border into the US as well.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. We like to think of ourselves in Canada as Europe light, right? We pride ourselves as striving for all the benefits that Europe has, and sometimes we get there and sometimes we don't. Interestingly, on family and parental leave, there's a pretty robust system in Canada, which in some circumstances may even exceed in terms of time some of the leaves in the EU. So for example, in Canada, federally, you can take up to 12 to 18 months protected leave, and each province or territory, state in Canada has its own unique little machinations under statute, but essentially it's 12 months to 18 months. Then there's a federal employment insurance program, they call it, which gives you a maximum of about $640 a week during that time of leave over 12 months, and you can extend that, i.e. cut the benefit down if you want to take a longer period to 18 months. And that type of benefit, as I say, is a federal standard. Employers have the choice to offer paid leave. Many will do. They'll call it a top-up program, but there's no government mandate requiring an employer to pay that leave. So if you have somebody, whether it's a mother, a father, same-sex couples, if they want to take that leave, that's protected and they have the right to do so. And then we look south to America, and shockingly different, as many of you may know, right? I think without holding myself out at all as a specialist in US employment law, far from it, but typically you have a federal maximum of 12 weeks unpaid leave with some rather rigorous qualification requirements. And that's about it. And then it falls purely to the employers. I mean, a number of our clients who have US operations will step in and try to fill some of that gap, but certainly there's a lot of sticker shock when they may open a Canadian operation and realize the type of benefits they're going to have to grant and the type of leaves these employees are going to get. It's shockingly different, I'll call it that.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, we sometimes, I'm sure all of the EU members can agree, or of the panelists, we sometimes have very shocked US clients if they haven't had operations in Germany for a while or in Europe. They can be very shocked about the Works Council's existence or all kinds of things which we have here. So let's then move to the purpose of this directive, which is actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, gender balance in the workplace. And so I would like to start with you, Hylda, and your assessment of to what extent gender balance has already been reached in the Netherlands, and to what extent the legislative situation in the Netherlands is going to support families in coming to a more equal distribution of paid and unpaid labor.
Yeah, that is indeed a very good question, I think, because indeed it's a work-life balance, but that applies obviously to both parents or both carers in a family. And I do wonder, like I said, we were indeed in the Netherlands also quite lacking behind in terms of the partner, looking after the partner and the leave, and providing the ability for a family to at least have a work-life balance for both in the family. And with the introduction of what I just explained, the partner leave and the extension, and now a parental leave on top of that being paid, or at least partially paid, I think we're closing in on the gap that existed and remains to be there, but still we're closing it. That said, though, the question is whether we actually manage to really find a gender balance. Not so much in between partners, maybe, but also more in general, in terms in wider in society, on the level of income and the income you earn. Because, as I just said, most of the leave for the partner is partially paid. And like Rikke said, in Denmark, it is state paid. So not for the employer to pay, but it's a state benefit that you get. And that is actually 70% of the maximum day wage. So, you know, for every person or family being dependent on an income that goes above around, on average, more or less 3,000 euros per month, if you're over that, it really hits you. It really is a fallback during that period of leave, and what the directive aims to get or strives for. You really have a downfall in your income level. And of course, if you're way over that and earning a lot of money, you might save up and you'll manage. But there remains sort of this mid-level group of people in the Netherlands who I doubt will be able to benefit actually from that. It's more than it was, don't get me wrong, it's more than it was, so it does provide for a bit, but whether that really helps in that sense, whether this directive really helps to create a work-life balance for both partners, and thus also a gender balance, I do wonder. I really do wonder whether this is the way to go about, honestly.
Yeah, thank you, Hylda. I fully agree. It's very similar in Germany, given that it's a state benefit which is capped at a certain amount. Let's move to Austria. Birgit, what are your expectations? Will there be equal distribution of care work among male and female employees anytime soon?
Well, to be honest, I would say no. And I checked the statistics a few days ago in preparing this webinar, and I saw that basically, I think it's between 15 and 20% of the fathers that are making use of the paternity, of the possibility to go on paternity leave, which we have since many years for both parents, meaning they both can have a right to go on paternity leave for 2 years. So they can split it. It can only be one, basically be only one that goes on paternity or maternity leave simultaneously. But the problem is, as Hylda already mentioned, and you also said, is the same in Austria concerning the capping of the payments during this period. Because depending on the model that you choose, you will end up with an income of between 1,000 and 2,000 euros per month, which for people that earned quite a lot before is not a lot. So what was also interesting in this regard is because we have a ban to work for pregnant mothers and also after giving birth for between 8 and 12 weeks after and 8 weeks before, and they basically get the full amount of their net income that they got before. So this maternity allowance is quite, let's say, quite good for the mothers. But the father's month that has been introduced 3 or 4 years ago, you will only get 700 euros per month in this period for the father. And at the end of the day, this will also be reduced by the other childcare allowance that you will get afterwards, depending on if you take it, if you make use of this paternity leave. So I think it is a really clear signal that income-wise, there needs to be a change there, because they even tried to make incentives in this regard, like as I said, the father month, because it didn't exist before. The father could only go on parental leave after this working ban of the mother, which was, speaking about gender balance, a clear signal, like the mother has to stay, or if it's same-sex partnership, even the one that is giving birth or the one that is responsible has to stay at home, and the other one can only follow later on. This was changed. They can go on leave at the same time. It will both will get paid, but at a very low level. So there were initiatives saying, okay, if you split the parental leave, you will get a bonus, but the bonus is 500 euro. And so it's not such an incentive as the employees would obviously expect to be ready to go on paternity leave. Even if I see that more companies are like handling it quite properly. And speaking of that, we see some trends in Austria with modern companies like, well, or whatever you can call them, like Bitpanda, that announced a few days ago that they are planning to send their parents or that want to be on maternity leave or on paternity leave, to send them for 20 weeks and will continue their payments. But the downside of this is, and this is why companies don't do that normally, is as soon as the company pays something in this regard, the state will say, oh, I'm fine, we are not paying anymore. So the full amount will stay with the companies, and it's not just the difference. So you see, it's a trend, there's initiatives, but at the end of the day, if I put it down in a nutshell, I would say it's a failure. So yeah, we didn't do it quite well income-wise.
Thank you, Birgit. This sounds very familiar from a German perspective. Also, what you say about the mother's income during the banned periods before and after birth. It is interesting to mention that in Germany, they receive the same income from the employer, but all employers are being reimbursed for that out of a reimbursement system, which is taking place among all employers, even if they just have 30 male employees, let's say at a construction company, they still need to feed that reimbursement system. So that is in itself a good idea, because it means that the mothers get the full income, and it's not a reproach to them for being pregnant and for causing cost. And that would, of course, be an idea for financing the father's leave as well. I'm just not sure about the financial status of the health insurance companies at the moment, given that they have just survived COVID. So that may be a background on.
You're totally right, and I agree
not extending that reimbursement. Yeah. Excuse me, didn't get that.
Sorry. No, I agree with you, Jessica, but I see a kind of a, let's call it, discrimination between the full amount that is paid by the state to the women during this period and the very low amount that is paid to men during this period, which is even shorter. Not speaking about parental leave that is coming afterwards, but it's, in my opinion, a clear signal that we are not as let's say modern or gender balanced thinking as other countries like perhaps Denmark or others are.
Yeah, let's see how the other countries are doing. So let's move on to Denmark and you, Rikke, and see how you are doing, if there's equal distribution in Denmark already.
Yeah, thank you. It's super interesting to hear, and as you have in Germany, we do as well have a possibility for employers to receive reimbursement of the public benefits if an employer decides to pay salary. Well, when this directive was to be implemented, there was a clear message from the politicians that this would really have a positive effect on the gender balance. And when we look at the situation today, most employees are offered periods with full salary from their employers. And then the employers receive the reimbursement. You have like the maternity leave for the mother, 14 weeks, and 2 weeks for the father's paternity leave. And then we have the parental leave, where usually employers offer full salary for 10 weeks. And you can say, well, when we look at that, when we then look at the statistics, they will show us that we have the female employees usually taking 200, or on average taking 280 days leave, and the men 34 days. So, I mean, there is a long way ahead of us. But will this directive and the implementation in Danish law then change this situation? And I think that the most important thing here will be the fact that you will earmark the weeks for the father, that you will have 11 weeks. If it's not taken, you will lose the leave entitlement and also the public benefits. And if we look at the other Nordic countries that already have earmarked leave, we have also seen a positive result in their gender balance when you look at management level, for instance. But more importantly, I think, is what we've seen from the big companies right now. They are all out there, or a lot of them are out there, to explain how they will now equally divide the paid leave, giving 24 weeks for the mother, 24 weeks for the partner. We have a lot of the big companies going to, or informing people about this intention. And I think that it sends a very strong signal, and also will incentivize more parents or more fathers in this situation to take leave. Because if they don't use it, this entitlement to full salary during leave will lapse. And I also think that it's used very much as employer branding right now. We have a situation where we don't have, any unemployment almost. So, I mean, you really need to be out there to signal that you are in this fight. And we've also seen, strong business leaders on the social media, mostly male leaders that has been, telling everyone on LinkedIn the fact that they did not take leave when they were young fathers, and don't do the same mistake as I did. And I think that that's also a very strong signal for the young generation out there. And we've seen women, strong female women leaders following up on this, saying, well, I'm a strong female leader. I took my leave and I'm still here. So there are very, very positive vibes out there. And I think that the signal from the companies together with this new initiative to change the legislation will help us going the right direction.
Thank you, Rikke. This is very interesting and also very positive to hear. Yeah, we have the same issue. I'm sure all of you agree. We have a very tight labor market and employers are very busy on trying to come up with good ideas how to support their staff and including such initiatives. So let's move to Canada and see what the situation is in Canada for parental leave and gender balance. Paul.
Back across the pond, similar actually to the Netherlands. I think what you see here is, in theory, there is an equal opportunity for our statutory leaves for parental leave. In practice, it's about, I think the latest statistics were between 38 to 46% of fathers will actually take a parental leave. That number is increasing, and there's certainly a generational gap without question. So certainly, I'm ancient. I'm 52. If you roll that back into someone in their 30s, and certainly what we see with our clients, there's certainly a generational recognition that the father is going to share equally in that burden and actually wants to take that leave. Whereas I think historically, certainly when I came up, it was the anomaly was a father who would take more than a weekend or two and use that leave. And so that's certainly changing. One of the challenges I think we have is because we don't have mandated full pay, and the maximum federal benefit is, as I said, about $640 a week. Unless you have an employer willing to make that commitment to top up that pay, very quickly it can become prohibitive to take an extended leave. When you're only receiving $640 a week to a maximum of 55% of your regular salary. So that's probably something which needs to change and is increasing over time. And to Rikke's point, employers are picking up that burden. And certainly in the current labor market, we share the same challenge. Right now, there is next to no employment for all practical purposes. And so if you're not an employer of choice, if you don't provide those benefits, a lot of employees have no interest in working with you. And certainly that's not inconsistent whether you're the mother or the father or an adoptive parent. That's a question that's asked of probably all of our clients now when someone is a child having age, is what are those policies and what can I expect to receive? Again, I won't beat up on the US, but not the same.
Yeah. Also, you do read about US companies also as part of their employer branding, some of the larger ones granting a few days of paid leave sometimes. But I love what you just said about the generational shift, because this also really gives me hope, because this is what we see in practice with younger families and the fathers now really being involved. And I think it's still a difference. I think they get more pushback sometimes if they announce they are going on parental leave, and they get more applause if they announce it on LinkedIn, whereas young mothers still tend to be hesitant to post on LinkedIn, I'm now leaving for maternity leave with a milk bottle as a picture. They usually don't do that, still don't do that. They try to come up as professional and as continuously working. So I think there's still a way to go, but I think there's a lot of shift towards the younger generation. I fully agree. So I will stay with you, Paul, and now move to another topic, which is the right to disconnect. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say by way of background information. In France, there has been a statute passed in 2016, which gives employee a right to disconnect. And now I'm interested to see what the situation is in Canada for that.
Sure, I'm failing the right to disconnect this morning. I'm kidding. In terms of Canada, it's interesting. We're a country of provinces, and each province has their own laws and regulations. And we have a number of standards in place which protect you from maximum hours of work, or essentially overtime. And historically, that's where the right to disconnect has sort of been pigeonholed. And there's a history in Canada of class action lawsuits against large employers for making someone, pick up their phone after hours and essentially work overtime when they're supposed to be at work, but nothing along the lines of a pure right to disconnect, such as you mentioned in France, but that's changing somewhat and slowly. One of our largest provinces, Ontario, enacted, it's very good PR. They call it the right to disconnect, but really what it is, it's the right to have a policy that talks about how you may have a right to disconnect. It doesn't actually give you any benefits, but it was great marketing for a recent election they had there. But each jurisdiction now is looking at that because certainly, and again, I think it's a generational shift. We hear from a lot of our clients that, and again, I'm not going to bash millennials, but certainly the younger generation wants to disconnect. They don't want to be on call 24/7, right? They don't want to be expected to answer emails at 9, 10, 11 o'clock. Whereas old fossils like me have this silly phone attached to your hip and you do that. And you don't think much about it until you basically step back and realize it's 11 o'clock and I'm answering emails, and that's probably not a healthy thing. So certainly in a number of provinces, we're seeing a push for that type of legislation to statutorily enshrine the right of an employee not to have to be on call, be on duty. But that said, if an employer right now, pretty much in any jurisdiction in Canada, is requiring an employee to be on call to do that work outside what I'll call normal hours, they run the risk of a complaint and penalties and having to pay additional wages for that type of work. And again, south of the border, it's a very hot topic. It's something a number of companies are implementing. But as far as statutory protection, no, you're not going to see that. And I suspect they have bigger issues to work on right now. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I fully agree. This is, of course, the outer boundary of the right to disconnect is actually the maximum amount of hours that can be worked for a week. And what I see is if you try to implement such a rule, be it on a company level or on a state level, and we don't have anything in Germany of that kind so far, we only have maximum hours of work, but not a specific right to disconnect, it's a bit in a conflict with the wish for flexibility. So often we mention those young mothers who want to, let's say, take care of the child, of young fathers, speaking of gender balance, who want to take care of the children in the afternoon and then sit down again. And then it can be a late hour. And then it's difficult for an employer to know when is this person available and when it's not available. So this is what I think would be difficult to really work out in any kind of a policy or statutory approach. So I'm moving to Austria, and Birgit, I'm interested to hear what your ideas or what the situation is in Austria on the right to disconnect.
Thank you, Jessica. So basically in Austria, we have these discussions about the right to disconnect and similar issues about flexibility and having more flexible working hours as well. But as we can see, there is no legal basis for that. So on the one hand, you don't have a regulation like it is in France, and as I heard also in Italy and other countries, where there is a real right to disconnect. So I would ask myself, if I'm an employer, if the employee which refuses to give me important information at a specific point in time would be acting in good faith and would not be in breach of his duties in his work, like fiduciary duties or things like that, which are soft law, but still. And on the other hand, we have a rather strict and formalistic working time law, meaning we also have to respect specific rest periods, which are usually 11 hours per day, daily 11 rest period hours that have to be granted. So normally you cannot interrupt them. You cannot just say, okay, I'm feeling fine by answering this email right now. I'm feeling fine by interrupting my vacation or whatever. So you are required by law to comply with these restrictions, which makes it much more difficult for employers to give this flexibility and to say, okay, I accept that you have a right to disconnect in these and that periods, and in others you will be available. If you don't agree on, let's say, specific working time models like on-call work or things like that, which is only possible to a certain extent as well. So there are legal restrictions in this regard, which make it more difficult, but we see many companies asking us, also concerning the flexibility that you mentioned, like what can we do to grant our employees more flexibility and to give them this possibility? And the truth at the end of the day is that there is a distinction between more executive employees, which do not fall under the Working Time and Rest Periods Act, because obviously the legislator thinks, okay, they can protect themselves. And if you cannot be assigned to these exceptions, there would hardly be a possibility to rule that out, even if both sides are fine, even if the employee and the employer agree on that. So you can see that. And we also see trends in this regard in Austria concerning the right to disconnect in combination with, let's say, giving more flexibility with vacation. And it's again Bitpanda that announced that they are planning to give their employees unlimited leave. So I understand it in a way, it's unlimited paid leave, but they will have to organize their work in the teams, or as far as I understood it. And I don't know how they will handle it in practice, because we don't know things like half a day of vacation normally, or we don't know like a interrupted vacation. So it will be interesting to see that in practice.
Thank you, Birgit. This is so similar to what we are experiencing. You're mentioning the 11 hours rest period, and I think they come out of a EU directive, yet another one. So this is why we have the same one, and we have the same issue, of course, or our clients have the same issue of the person who doesn't mind answering an email during the evening, and often it just goes by the German saying, where you don't have a plaintiff, you don't have a judge. But that's not really a legal solution, of course, to the issue. And so this is going to remain a topic. It is fairly well known that Volkswagen, the German car manufacturer, has a number of years ago decided to shut down their email servers for certain periods. And this is, of course, a very effective way to really enforce the reaching out. I'm not sure if this helps against other kinds of messages being used, but in principle, this is, of course, a very progressive approach to actually really enforce the right to disconnect in the strongest sense. So I would like to move on to the topic of hybrid working, given that the right to disconnect is mostly relevant if you are working from home. If you're working in your office, you're available anyhow, and you wouldn't take a 3-hour break to take care of your children. But if you're working from home, of course, there is the question, when do you disconnect? So this leads us to hybrid working from home, working from the office, and a combination of both. So I would like to ask first about the Netherlands, Hylda. What is the situation in your country? I think I heard about the right to work from home, but I may be wrong in that respect. Hylda, please answer.
Oh, you're well up to speed there, Jessica. Absolutely. There's a law still, or a proposal still pending before the government, where employees are entitled to a right to work remotely, and remotely, thank God, meaning their home address, and not remotely meaning everywhere abroad. But I might be biased in saying that from an employer perspective. But it is still pending. And what does it mean, the right to work from home? It would mean that employees can simply file a request with their employer, and that you as an employer can only object to that if you have severe business interest to do so, which in practice comes down to hardly any reason being enough to reject such requests. And I personally, I think that is going way too far. And jumping on to a comment made by one of our participants to this webinar, is that, you know, you make choices as an employee as well. And I think it's you can discuss it with your employer to come to hybrid working, and there may be needs for an employer to have you in the office. You may sometimes be more efficient to work from home, and that can all be done, in my opinion, just with a good conversation and no necessary need for legislation. But having said that, what do we see in practice? And so at the moment, we don't have hybrid working legislation in place in that respect in the Netherlands, but what you see in practice is that a lot of companies following our COVID pandemic have started to introduce it, and but more and more under pressure, I would say, from the younger generation. Also, I would say, following on from your comments, Paul, it is really considered a added benefit, an employment benefit more, that in our current war on talent also is really helping employers to find new employees in that respect. I think one of the larger consultancy firms like Ernst & Young allows for their employees to work remotely for 3 months or a maximum certain period, 6 weeks, from anywhere they want. And you see the younger generation really using that, which is adding to their work-life balance. They really like that. They just group, they rent a house somewhere in Spain, and they go there for 6 weeks, and they sit down and they work from 6 weeks from Spain, having the time of their lives, basically, which is a win-win situation for the employer as well. So this hybrid working, remote working, I think can really be a good instrument to create a proper work-life balance. But that said, it also depends really on the employee and your character, whether it's really beneficial to you, because there's a downside to it. That you as an employer are then left with people who just simply cannot stop working and are really drawn to their computers, even, you know, when they at 9, and they simply fail to close their computer to disconnect, so to speak, moving and, you know, leading to a situation where your employees are just overworked and falling into the trap of a burnout. So that is also making it difficult. So it's really a balanced exercise, both from the employee and the employer. But, you know, if you keep all those things in mind, I think it might definitely be a good instrument, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Hylda. I fully agree with that. Yeah, with all of what you've said. Basically, it's a war for talent, and it's an added benefit. And where it works, I think it's a good benefit if you have a balance of people being able to concentrate better at home, but then being available at the office if something needs to be done more physically or more ad hoc, which you cannot really prepare for in advance so much. But it's an ongoing discussion in Germany as well. Let us move to Canada. So, Paul, I'm interested. You're living in a really large country, and given the distances, I could imagine that you have been a bit ahead of us Europeans even before COVID. Is that assumption correct?
You'd think that. Yeah, no, it's true. We have a lot of land. And what was interesting with COVID was a lot of things which historically have been considered impossible suddenly became possible in about a day or two. And one of those was working remotely. And so certainly, given our geographic scope, there has been a history, I'll call it, in Canada of allowing for some remote work or a hybrid work model. Interesting, there's no legislation which requires that in any of our jurisdictions, but certainly with the pandemic, you know, as a practical example, in some of our larger centers, you know, a commute to work of 2 hours each way is not unheard of. And so, given traffic and distance, and so, you know, a lot of employees, you might imagine, you know, who would get up at 6 in the morning, sit in their car for an hour and a half or 2 hours, go to work for 8 hours, and then jump in their car for 2 more hours to drive home, suddenly realize, hang on, I don't have to do that? That sounds pretty good. And now what we're seeing is where employers have said, look, we would like to draw you back to the office. I think that the latest anecdotal poll from one of our media outlets was about 40% of employees have said, I'm quitting. You know, if you take away this hybrid work model, I'm not coming back. It's been great. So practically, again, I like one line about, you know, it's a war for talent. Yeah, right now what we're seeing is employers having to keep that hybrid work model in place, and I don't see that going away. If anything, I see it being crystallized, and based on the work we're doing at our office nationally, certainly we're doing an awful lot of policies addressing work from home, the right to hybrid work, how that's going to continue, and everything flowing out of that, which I won't get into in terms of workers' compensation and hours of work and monitoring, but certainly it's not going anywhere. And if you're an employer right now in an industry which working from home or working remotely is viable and you're not offering it, you're probably not attracting people.
Yeah, that is the same, I guess, in most countries. And yeah, so this is something which all of our clients do have to face as well, and are currently, I don't know how many of the remote working policies we have drafted over the last 2 years. It's a number, and yeah, and of course it does include a few more difficult questions, especially since Hylda mentioned the person working in Spain, and then you have the questions of people even wanting to work outside of the EU. So you have all kinds of tax, social security, and data protection issues to cover. So it really depends how fond you are of the particular employee if you want to invest that much time in trying to find a solution for very specific wishes sometimes. So let's move to Denmark. Rikke, what is the situation about hybrid working in Denmark?
Well, it was also a tidal wave, you know, just floating all over Denmark when the pandemic hit us, you know, that at one point, you know, employers realized, okay, employees do actually work, even though they're working from home. It was like an epiphany, and everyone was super happy about it. And I think that we also had, like only a few months ago, new legislation that simplified the rules that we have when people are working from home with regard to health and safety. What do you need as an employer to, you know, provide to the employees of furniture and chair, desk, lighting, and so on. And they simplified the rules and made it very clear that if you're working on average more than 2 days at home per week, then you will need to have a proper seating for performing the work. Before this regulation was introduced, it was a bit more unclear when do we need to, as an employer, to provide the employees with all these benefits. But you know, it came 2 months ago, and I think that since the pandemic hit and everyone was super happy, something has happened. I mean, we still see the young generation with kids that are very happy about the opportunity to work from home, to get a better work-life balance. But we also hear the even younger people wanting to go to the office to meet their colleagues, and also other groups of employees that do actually really want to go to the office. And that really puts the employer in kind of a limbo, because you need to accommodate, of course, the wish for being able to work from home now in this war for talent. But on the other hand, you maybe also seen some of the challenges when you have people working from home, for instance, with regard to the culture. So I think that right now we see the employers are in a bit, you know, considering what to do next. And we see that many employers limit the possibility to work from home to 2 days a week, and maybe even on fixed days, to ensure that, you know, the remaining 3 days, everyone will be in the office and that we can really try to work on the culture. But we just cannot completely give up on the hybrid working. And then, of course, we also have the foreign, if employees want to work from across, you know, from another country, that's also an issue. And I mean that most employers here really try to solve that by saying you can only work from your home in Denmark, and that's it. But yeah, it's a limbo situation right now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rikke. Yeah, again, this sounds very similar in all countries, and yeah, it is just a difficult situation, but it's also, of course, an option for everybody. So I guess in principle, it's a good situation that it's now an additional option, but of course, people and employers and employees need to juggle the interests of both sides and try to come up with solutions that work for everybody. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting remark about Denmark. Let's now move, we are nearing the end of our session, and let's now move to questions and answers. I see a comment more than a question really, but I think it's a very interesting thought by you, Michael. On to what extent do state and employers need to provide for everything? And you mentioned that people need to make their own decisions and then live with the consequences, and state cannot provide for everything. I get the point, and I certainly get the point if sometimes our clients describe the work attitude of very young as employees, some of them do have a very expectant attitude. I get that. On the other side, we do have a war for talent in most countries, certainly in all of the countries where our participants are located. And so employers do need to do what they want to do to attract the talent which they need. And yeah, let's see how that is going to continue if the next downswing of the economy is coming. And yeah, also given our initial topic of equality, I think one of the conclusions really is that to actually entice families and fathers to stay at home would be helpful to set habits within the family. And this is, of course, only possible with more funding, either from the employer or the state side. And but of course, ultimately, it's the family's decision. And that is probably also one observation. The state and employer can only intrude so far into a family. And we still see quite a number of female employees who take every sick child day and who yeah, just do all the care work and don't negotiate within the family for whatever reasons. So it's a tricky balance, and let's see how the progress is continuing. So with that, I would like to thank all of you for this super interesting session, and would like to hand over for you, Yoshi, for your final remarks. Thank you.